So good evening and welcome. I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News. Now, it's a ruling that's created real division. The Court of Appeal has reversed the decision so that children can now take puberty blockers without parental consent. Transgender rights campaigners say this decision will spare young people from the distress of developing unwanted sexual characteristics by delaying the onset of puberty. But the critics say that there's little evidence to show the long-term psychological impact on teens and also little known about the long-term side effects of the drugs on an individual's health. I'm delighted to say that Shay Robertson is joining me and my panel for this debate. Now, he came on to my show a couple of weeks ago to talk about his transition. Shay, I want to ask you, first of all, welcome. I'm going to come to you first. What do you make of this court ruling? Is it right that children should be able to have the access to puberty blockers without the parents' consent?
I actually think this is a great step forward for the trans community. At the end of the day, a lot of cis children, so a lot of children born in their gender from birth, are actually allowed to have puberty blockers to stop early onset puberty. So really going forward in the trans community, what is the actual difference? All it actually is doing is buying that child time to find their correct path. So blockers, personally for myself, is just kind of giving them that space to actually think about it, and also it gives them that sense of feeling that they've started their journey. It's not hormones, this is purely just blockers to bide them time. So yes, I do think this is a massive step forward for the community.
But I was going to ask, aren't there any sort of side effects, though, to those blockers? Taking those on early, could they not have other consequences later on in life?
Blockers isn't something that's permanently going to damage their life, no. Blockers is just literally, like I say, it's just biding the time to help that child find themselves. It would be a completely different story if you were talking about hormones, but we're not. We're just literally pausing that time, if you like, so the child feels they are on their path. So as for permanent damage, as far as I'm aware, there is no evidence that this can cause any damage.
So if they then change their mind, it should be an OK thing. Just for any viewers who didn't see the show that you were on, just remind people of your story and your journey.
So I am a transgender man myself. I mean, I didn't fully transition until later in life. I was early 40s, and I didn't have to go through the puberty blocker stage. So for myself, it is a very later in life journey that I've taken on. But we're now kind of relating back to the children and their path. So just going back onto the puberty blockers, I feel that this is a great step forward for those children.
At age 12, though, say you at age 12, did you know that you wanted to transition at all?
Oh, I think we've had this conversation before. Right, okay, so just kind of, jumping onto that. I can't go back and I can't say I was transgender when I was younger because I didn't understand the word, what transgender actually was. I knew I was different. I knew I was attracted to the opposite sex. I was attracted to women. Was I transgender then? Who knows? I can't answer that because I didn't know myself. When I look back now, I can see patterns where it's led me up to my journey now. But like I said, my best friend when I was at school, we both played cricket, we both played football, we both did boys' things. She's happily married in a straight relationship with a gentleman, and obviously I've took the transgender path. So even though our history of growing up has been exactly the same, we've gone on different paths. So no, I didn't know I was transgender when I was younger because I didn't know that was the word. I only, in my specific head, I only could see gay or straight people, and because that was my pathway, I just presumed that I was gay because I was attracted to the opposite sex.
See, that's the worry, isn't it? Even you transitioned later, and to do these things to block puberty seems like a bit of a worry. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on it, Leo.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear your story, Shay, and it's great you followed that path and found happiness. But a lot of children, there's been a huge explosion in transitioning over the past very few years. Like the number of gender clinics in America has gone from 1 to over 50, and there's been a huge explosion in Europe as well. And I think we're rushing into this without really the data and without really being in an atmosphere in a society where we can freely debate it. Anybody who, any scientist or researcher who brings out anything that's slightly critical of the explosion in gender transitioning is denounced as transphobic. But we really need to look at this. If we're talking about medicating children, particularly when it's things that can have real long-term effects. I know you said the puberty blockers can be reversible and don't have nasty long-term effects. I mean, that's true if it's for a short time, but certainly the hormones they can lead to all kinds of nasty things: osteoporosis, sterility, and then requiring invasive medical treatments like hysterectomies. So it can be quite nasty. And what we're seeing from studies, the studies that have been done, between 61% and 98% of children who express intentions of transitioning revert to their natal gender, revert to their biological sex. So I think if we're sort of hurrying children through this process, we're storing up some problems for 10, 15 years down the line when I think a significant proportion could well want to detransition.
Yeah, you know what though, Leo. I totally agree with you on the hormone thing. I do, because that's obviously the next step. But the blockers are literally buying the time for that child to find themselves. If you were saying to me, right, is it fair for a child to go on hormones at the age of 9, 10, 11? I'd totally agree with you. I'd say no, because I do feel they're a little bit too young to make that choice. Whereas the blocker is literally allowing them time to breathe. But it also is, once they've been to the doctors, and bear in mind, this isn't just going to happen, you can go on blockers. You also get counselling, you get to see the doctor, you see the gender clinic, and this is done over time. It's not something that's just going to say, yes, you're on it. You're monitored, you have blood tests, and everything is there for you to guide you. So it's not just a go down the road and I'm on blockers tomorrow. It doesn't happen like that. But I had a young friend who actually was presenting to their parents, and they turned around and said, if you don't get me on testosterone by the time I'm 14, I won't be here in 6 months' time. Now, then what does the parent do? Those parents absolutely froze, and obviously they don't want to lose their child. But for them, by allowing their child to go on to blockers, it allowed the child then thought they're on that path of their journey. They now see the gender clinic, they're under counselling, and it brought that child time to see what they actually wanted. So it is just a buying time phrase. It's just helping that child. At the end of the day, she's still here, but she might not have been. And she's grateful for that chance to have taken those blockers. Yep.
That's great to hear. Yeah, Calvin, did you want to?
Sure. Hi, Shay. Good to see you again. My concern here is that it's just not an appropriate treatment for gender dysmorphia, and that's what we're talking about initially in the childhood stage. It's gender dysmorphia, isn't it? We're not saying that these children necessarily identify as trans because it's too early in the conversation for that, because they're too young. And in regards to your recent point, your most recent point about suicide prevention, suicide threats, without undermining that argument, I think, it's quite often for a young child to say, I want this now, if I don't get this, I'm going to kill myself. That's not a threat that a parent should abide by. It's possibly a sign of further mental illness, of further mental development issues that need addressing and need treatment. And I don't think medical treatments are necessarily the appropriate approach. I think there's wider counselling that needs to be, and therapy that needs to be taking place before we give drugs to young people.
Yeah, it's reassuring, Shay, it's reassuring to hear that the processes that you've seen are involve a lot of counselling before there's any sort of medical intervention, because I think that's essential. Like some of the stories I've heard from America, where it might be regulated differently, state by state, the children are being rushed into medical intervention, which obviously just common sense says we should go through counselling and treat this process very carefully, because as Calvin says, when we're kids, we've got all kinds of ideas about, we're going through all the turmoil of finding out who we are. We've got the hormonal changes in our body, so we don't know. And being a man doesn't necessarily mean one thing. It's always meant everything from like Hulk Hogan to David Bowie. It's not just one particular stereotype.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. But at the end of the day as well, I know I keep throwing a but in there, but at the end of the day, if there was a choice of my child telling me I might not be here in 6 months, can you help me? I would much rather take that blocker route, because the child that I'm referring to, their mental health changed overnight because they knew then they were on the path of the journey they wanted. Now, as it actually happens, that child has not carried on to hormones. They have stopped the journey. So that blockers save their life and help them through their journey, because then they realise it's not what they actually want. There's no damage. They've now transitioned, so back to their original birth. Everything is back where it should be. And that child's mental health is so much massively more improved.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you, and that's. I'm glad that child is well and things, but I do worry about the idea that a child can hold you to ransom with it, and that's a little bit of a worry for parents out there in particular. And I would say that in that case, as Calvin mentioned, I think that it feels like a level of body dysmorphia, and it's difficult to work out the difference between whether somebody's suffering with something like body dysmorphia or actually they really want to transition. So I understand that the blockers will give them time, but it's the ongoing effects and whether this could influence someone. Do you think, Shay, that will influence people to go forward with this gender reassignment and to take the blockers, even though they're just toying with the idea, but they're not really, because I said loads of things when I was a child as well.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody's going to get on blockers anyway without counselling, seeing your GP, seeing the gender clinic, and this takes months and even years. So it's not going to happen overnight. The fact that these people are getting counselling, getting the help that they need, like I say, is a massive move forward. But they're not going to be on hormones anyway for at least, quite a long time after the blockers. And moving forward, obviously, for somebody out of teenage years, they're not even going to be getting blockers anyway, because there's no point in it. So I do agree it is a hard one, but for the trans community, it's a massive step forward for those children that feel they're getting treatment and without any permanent damage.